I need to tell you something I've never said out loud. 15 years ago, I got a phone call that should have been impossible. My husband had been dead for over a decade. I'd mourned him, buried an empty casket, raised our daughter with his photo on the mantle, but when I heard his voice on that phone, I didn't feel relief. I felt rage, and that's what scares me most, because part of me wishes he'd stayed dead. Before I tell you what happened next, I need you to understand something. This channel exists because I learned the hard way that the people closest to us are capable of secrets we can't imagine. And if my story can help even one person recognize the warning signs I missed, then maybe these 15 years of pain meant something. And if you're watching this thinking that could never happen to me, you're making the same mistake I did. So do me a favor, hit that subscribe button right now. For the you that might need these stories one day. The you that might be ignoring a red flag right now and doesn't even know it, because I ignored mine, and it cost me everything. Now let me take you back to where it all started. I met James Hartwell in a pottery class during my sophomore year at UMass Amherst. I remember because I was terrible at centering clay, and he sat across from me with his sleeves rolled up, making it look effortless. He had these careful hands, engineer's hands I'd learn later, and when my bowl collapsed for the third time, he didn't laugh. He just leaned over and said, "You're fighting it. Let it tell you what it wants to be." That was James, patient, deliberate, the kind of man who read instruction manuals cover to cover and labeled his moving boxes with color-coded markers. He was studying mechanical engineering. I was getting my teaching degree in art education. We were an odd pair. His world was blueprints and calculations. Mine was finger paint and creative chaos. But somehow, we fit. He liked that I made him see beauty in imperfection. I liked that he made me feel safe in a world that had always felt too big and uncertain. We got married 3 weeks after graduation. My mother cried at the wedding, and not in the happy way. She pulled me aside in the bridal suite and said, "Ellie, you're 25 years old. You haven't lived yet." I told her I was choosing my life. I believed that. For 3 years, we had the kind of marriage people write country songs about. We lived in a small rental house outside Worcester. James got a job at a manufacturing plant. I taught high school art to teenagers who mostly wanted to sleep through class. We were happy. Not Instagram perfect happy. We argued about money and whose turn it was to take out the trash, but real happy. The kind where you can sit in silence and it doesn't feel empty. Then 9/11 happened, and like so many men his age, James felt the pull. He didn't talk to me before he walked into the recruitment office. He came home with brochures and this look in his eyes I'd never seen before, something between duty and desperation. He said he needed to do something that mattered. I was 6 months pregnant with Sophie. I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to throw those brochures in his face and ask him if we didn't matter, but I didn't. Because the truth is, I understood. Not the military part, I'd never understand that, but the need to be more than what you are, to prove something to yourself. So I supported him. I smiled when he left for basic training. I sent care packages with terrible homemade cookies and letters that tried to sound braver than I felt. Sophie was born while he was at Fort Benning. He missed it. He saw her for the first time on a grainy video call, and I watched him cry through a screen, and I told myself this sacrifice meant something. When he deployed to Afghanistan, Sophie was 6 months old. She was just learning to clap her hands, this delighted, chaotic clapping at everything. Birds, ceiling fans, her own feet. James recorded a video of himself clapping back at her before he left. I must have played it 1,000 times in the months that followed. The notification officers came on a Tuesday morning in March. I remember because Sophie had just learned to clap her hands, and when the doorbell rang, she clapped at the sound. I was still in my pajamas. I'd been up since 4 with her teething. I opened the door holding my daughter on my hip, and I saw their uniforms, and I knew. They told me James's convoy hid an IED outside Kandahar. They used words like catastrophic damage and remains unrecoverable. I remember nodding like I understood, but the words didn't connect to anything real. They asked if I had someone to call. I said yes. I don't know if that was true. There wasn't enough left to send him home. That's what they told me. Not in those words. They used careful, military language, but that's what it meant. So we held a memorial service with an empty casket. I picked out flowers he would have hated. I let the town fill our living room with casseroles and sympathy cards. I wore black and accepted condolences from people who barely knew us. And the whole time, Sophie clapped her hands at strangers because she didn't know the world had ended. For years afterward, I wore his dog tags under my shirt. The metal was cold against my skin in the morning and warm by nighttime. I talked to him when I was alone, told him about Sophie's first steps, her first word, the way she had his stubborn chin. I built an entire life around the story of James, the hero, the man who died for something bigger than himself. I told Sophie about her daddy every night before bed. I showed her photos. I made him real for her in the only way I could, through stories and imagination. She'd never remember him, but I was determined she would know him. The town treated us like we were made of glass. People spoke to me in hushed voices, as if normal volume might shatter me. The other military wives brought meals for months. They meant well. They all meant well. But their sympathy became its own kind of prison. I existed in this strange limbo. Not quite a widow, because there was no body, no final goodbye, but not quite a wife either, because he wasn't coming home. I was 28 years old, and I'd already become the woman I'd spend the rest of my life being. The veteran's widow, the single mother, the woman people felt sorry for at the grocery store. I thought I knew what loss felt like. I was wrong. Sophie turned 15 on a Thursday in October. Not a milestone birthday, not sweet 16 or 18, just 15. The awkward middle year where she was too old for kid parties but too young to feel grown. So we stayed home, just the two of us, like we'd done every year since she was born. I'd taken the afternoon off from school. We were in the kitchen frosting cupcakes, chocolate with vanilla buttercream, her favorite since she was 7. She was telling me about this boy in her chemistry class, talking with her hands the way I do when I'm excited, getting frosting on her sleeve. The late afternoon sun came through the window at that perfect autumn angle, turning everything golden. I remember thinking, this is enough, this moment, just us. My phone rang. I almost didn't answer. It was sitting on the counter next to the mixer, screen up, vibrating against the granite. Unknown number. Probably a spam call about my car's extended warranty or some political campaign. I was mid-swirl with a piping bag, and Sophie was laughing at how lopsided my rose looked compared to hers. But something made me wipe my hands on my jeans and pick it up. I pressed the green button, said hello, and a voice I hadn't heard in 15 years said, "Ellie, it's me. It's James." The phone slipped from my hand. Not dropped, slipped. Like my fingers forgot how to hold things. It clattered against the counter, bounced once, and I watched it fall in slow motion, the way you watch car accidents happen. Sophie looked up from her cupcake. "Mom, you okay?" I couldn't answer, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything except stare at the phone lying face up on the floor, still connected. A thin voice coming from the speaker saying my name again. "Ellie, Ellie, are you there?" I bent down and picked it up. My hands were shaking so violently I had to use both of them to hold it steady against my ear. Sophie was saying something, asking me something, but I couldn't hear her over the sound of my own heartbeat. "Ellie?" the voice said again. And God help me, I knew it was him. 15 years hadn't erased the particular cadence of how he said my name, the slight emphasis on the first syllable, the way his voice dipped at the end, like a question even when it wasn't. "This isn't possible," I whispered. "I know. You're dead." "I know." Sophie touched my arm. "Mom, who is it? What's wrong?" I held up one finger. "Wait, just wait," and walked out of the kitchen, through the living room, out onto the front porch. The October air was cold against my face. I could see Mrs. Patterson across the street checking her mailbox, her golden retriever sniffing around her azaleas. Normal life. Continuing, while mine splintered into before and after. "How?" I asked. My voice sounded like it belonged to someone else, flat, clinical. "I can explain," James said. "I need to explain, but not over the phone." Ellie, I'm alive. I'm in Montana. There's a veterans facility here, and His voice cracked. I've been here for a long time. I sat down on the porch steps because my legs wouldn't hold me anymore. 15 years. Yes. You've been alive for 15 years. Yes. The word hung between us like an accusation. I thought about the empty casket, the folded flag they'd given me, the nights I'd cried myself to sleep wearing his dog tags, the way I taught our daughter to love a ghost. Sophie, I said, and my voice broke on her name. She's inside right now. It's her birthday. She's 15 years old, James. 15. I heard him inhale sharply, a sound like pain. Does she, he started, does she know about me? The question was so absurd I almost laughed. Know about you? I've told her about you every day of her life. You're the hero who died before she could remember you. You're the reason she writes essays about sacrifice in school. You're the empty chair at every birthday, every Christmas, every graduation she'll ever have. I was crying now, angry tears that blurred Mrs. Patterson into a watercolor smudge across the street. I'm sorry, James said. Ellie, I'm so sorry, but I need you to understand. I need to explain why did you let me believe you were dead? Silence. Why did you let your daughter grow up without a father? More silence. Why didn't you call, didn't write, didn't give us the choice? Yes, he finally said, and his voice was so small. All of that. I need to explain all of that. I could hear Sophie inside, calling for me, asking if I was okay. I looked back through the screen door and saw her standing in the kitchen, backlit by that golden autumn sun, holding a cupcake with a single candle burning on top. 15 years old, half her life gone, and he'd missed all of it. There's a facility here, James continued, speaking faster now, like he was afraid I'd hang up. It's for veterans with complicated situations. I've been getting help, treatment. I'm better now, stable. And I know I don't have the right to ask you for anything, but he paused. I could hear him breathing, ragged, desperate. Can you come? He asked. Please, I need to explain this to your face. You deserve that much. Sophie deserves that much. The candle was still burning inside. Sophie was still waiting, and I was sitting on a porch steps holding a phone to my ear, listening to a dead man beg for forgiveness, while the woman I'd been for 15 years, the widow, the survivor, the martyr, crumbled into something I didn't recognize. I need to go, I said. Ellie, please. My daughter is waiting for me. It's her birthday. I know it is. I've kept track every year, every birthday. I've known. That's what broke me. Not the revelation that he was alive, not the 15 years of lies, but the fact that he'd known. He'd counted her birthdays from whatever hole he'd buried himself in, and he'd chosen, actively chosen, not to be there for them. Don't call this number again, I said. Wait. But I'd already hung up. I sat there on the porch steps, phone in my lap, watching Mrs. Patterson's dog chase a squirrel, and I thought, I have to go inside and sing happy birthday. I have to light that candle again and watch my daughter make a wish. I have to frost cupcakes and smile and pretend the ground beneath us hasn't just opened up. I want you to pause and think about something. Right now, in this moment, is there someone in your life you trust completely? Someone you'd bet your entire future on? I had that. His name was James, and in one phone call, 15 years of trust shattered like glass. The stories I tell here, they're not entertainment. They're survival guides. They're maps of all the ways people you love can break you, and how to recognize the cracks before everything collapses. You think you know the people in your life. I thought I knew mine. We're both wrong. Subscribe so you're ready when the call comes. Because it will come. Maybe not today, maybe not this year, but it will come. Now here's what I did next, and why it was the worst decision of my life I didn't tell Sophie. How could I? What words exist for that conversation? Hey, honey, remember your dead father? The hero I've been telling you about for 15 years? Surprise. He's been alive in Montana this whole time. There was no gentle way to detonate her entire childhood, so I lied. I told her I had to visit a sick friend in Montana, an old college roommate. She barely looked up from her phone when I said it. 15-year-olds exist in their own worlds. I packed a small bag, kissed her forehead, left her with my sister, and drove away from our house at dawn. 12 hours to Montana. 12 hours alone with my thoughts, which felt like a prison sentence. The first few hours I was numb. I drove on autopilot, following GPS directions through towns I didn't see, past landscapes that didn't register. But somewhere around Pennsylvania, the numbness cracked, and underneath was rage. Pure, white-hot rage. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went bloodless. I imagined what I'd say to him, what I'd scream, how I'd make him understand what he'd done to us. I practiced the words out loud in the empty car. You were alive. You were alive, and you let me bury an empty casket. You were alive, and you let Sophie grow up fatherless. But then, crossing into Ohio, the rage shifted into something more dangerous. Hope. Desperate, pathetic hope. What if he'd been in a coma? All these years? What if he'd been captured by insurgents and just escaped? What if he'd had amnesia and only now remembered who he was? My mind invented scenarios, each one more elaborate than the last, trying to find a version of this story where James wasn't the villain, where there was a reason, a good reason, something that would make sense of 15 years of grief. Because if there was a reason, a real reason, then maybe I could forgive him. Maybe we could put our family back together. Maybe Sophie could have her father back and I could have, what, my husband? The man I married didn't let his wife mourn him for a decade and a half. By Indiana, I was crying so hard I had to pull over at a rest stop. I sat in the parking lot, forehead pressed against the steering wheel, and realized what terrified me most. What if his reason was better than my pain? What if he had suffered in ways I couldn't imagine? What if he'd made an impossible choice, and I was the selfish one for not understanding? What would that make me? A woman who couldn't forgive her husband for surviving. I called my sister from a gas station outside Omaha. It was 2 a.m, Nebraska time. She answered on the first ring, voice thick with sleep. Ellie, what's wrong? Is Sophie okay? She's fine, I said. I stood under the fluorescent lights, moths batting against the glass, diesel fumes in the air. All these years, I thought I was a widow. What if I was just abandoned? What are you talking about? Nothing. Forget it. Ellie, if something happened to me, I interrupted, if I just disappeared and never came back, would you take care of Sophie? Jesus, Ellie, where are you? What's going on? I'm visiting a friend. Bullshit. Tell me where you are. I can't. Then turn around, she said, and her voice had that big sister authority that usually worked on me. Whatever you're doing, wherever you're going, turn around and come home. I stood there, phone pressed to my ear, watching a semi-truck pull out of the parking lot, its taillights disappearing into the dark Wyoming plains. I can't, I said again, and I hung up, and I kept driving. The veterans facility was outside Billings, tucked into the mountains like a secret. The building was newer than I expected. Clean lines, big windows, the kind of place that was trying very hard not to look like what it was. I sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes, engine off, hands shaking. Finally, I forced myself out of the car and through the front doors. The woman at the reception desk was younger than me, early 30s maybe, with kind eyes and a name tag that read Sarah. She asked how she could help. I opened my mouth and nothing came out. I tried again. I'm here to see James Hartwell. She typed something into her computer, then looked up at me with an expression I recognized immediately. Pity. Not surprise, not confusion. Pity. You must be Eleanor, she said gently, and I understood, standing there in that too bright lobby, that I wasn't the first wife to show up here. I wasn't the first woman to drive across the country chasing a ghost who decided to stay dead. He's in Building C, Sarah said. I'll call and let him know you're here. I wasn't the first, and that somehow made everything worse. They led me through a corridor that smelled like institutional cleaning products and something else, something medicinal and sad. Building C was quieter than the main facility, smaller, the kind of place where people came to hide from the world or from themselves. James was waiting in a common room with large windows overlooking the mountains. He stood when I entered, and for a moment I didn't recognize him. He looked older, much older than 43. His hair had gone almost entirely gray. He was thinner, not fit thin, but worn thin, like something had been carved out of him and never filled back in. There were scars on his face. One ran from his left temple down to his jaw. Another twisted across the back of his right hand, the kind of scar that came from something burning. When he saw me, he started crying, just stood there 10 feet away, tears running down his face, and I felt nothing. Not relief, not anger, not even recognition, really. Just this cold, empty nothing where 15 years of emotion should have been. "Ellie," he said, and his voice cracked on my name. I stayed by the door. "Tell me." He wiped his face with the back of his scarred hand, nodded, gestured to the chairs near the window. I sat. He sat across from me, careful to keep distance between us, like he knew I couldn't bear to be touched by him. "The IED was real," he began. "My convoy was hit outside Kandahar. 3 men died instantly. I should have been the 4th. He spoke slowly, choosing each word with the precision I remembered from our marriage. The engineer in him, even now, trying to construct something that made sense. I was pulled from the wreckage, barely conscious. I woke up in a cell. Concrete floor, no windows. I was held by insurgents for 8 months. He looked at his hands, the scars. They wanted information, intelligence about troop movements, supply routes. I didn't have anything worth telling them, but they didn't believe me, so they... He stopped, swallowed hard. "I don't need the details," I said. My voice sounded distant, clinical. "No," he agreed quietly. "You don't. How did you get out?" "A special forces team raided the compound. Pure chance. They were targeting someone else, didn't even know I was there. When they found me, I'd been in that cell for 243 days. I'd stopped counting after 200. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes that made my stomach turn. Shame. Deep, festering shame. They brought me to a military hospital in Germany, then Walter Reed. I was debriefed, examined, evaluated. PTSD, traumatic brain injury, malnutrition, survivors. Guilt. He rattled off the diagnoses like a grocery list. The doctors said I'd need years of treatment, maybe a lifetime of it. "And you couldn't tell me this?" The words came out sharper than I intended. "I couldn't come home like that," he said, and there was something almost pleading in his voice. "Ellie, I was broken. I woke up screaming every night. I had panic attacks in crowded rooms. I couldn't hear a car backfire without dropping to the ground. I wasn't the man you married anymore." "I didn't marry you for your mental health," I said. "I married you for better or worse. Doesn't worse include this?" "Sophie," he said quietly. I kept thinking about Sophie. She was only 6 months old when I left. She wouldn't remember me. And I couldn't... His voice broke again. I couldn't let her first real memory of her father be a monster who woke up screaming every night. I stood up, started pacing. My hands were shaking. "So what happened? The military just let you stay dead?" "They gave me a choice," he said. "There's a program. It's classified for cases like mine. Soldiers who come back so damaged that reintegration might do more harm than good. They offered me medical discharge and treatment in a secure facility. But there was a condition. You had to stay dead. Yes. And you agreed." "Yes." I stopped pacing, looked at him. "Did you ever think about coming back?" The question hung in the air between us. He looked at the floor, at his scarred hands, anywhere but at me. "Every single day," he finally said. "For the first year, I thought about nothing else. I'd write letters I never sent. I'd pick up the phone and dial your number and hang up before it rang, but then what? Then time passed. A year became 2. 2 became 5. I'd check on you through social media, through friends who didn't know I was alive. I saw pictures of you and Sophie. You looked okay. You'd gotten a new job. Sophie was in school. You were surviving. And I convinced myself that you were better off. Better off, I repeated, the words tasting like poison. I told myself I was protecting you, that seeing me like this would destroy you, that Sophie deserved better than a broken father. He looked up at me then, and his face was wet with tears. But that's a lie, isn't it? I wasn't protecting you. I was protecting myself. And there it was, the truth underneath all the noble explanations. You chose to stay away, I said slowly, because it was easier than facing what you'd done to us. Yes, you let me grieve you. You let Sophie grow up fatherless. You let us build our entire lives around your death. And you did it because coming back, being honest, was too hard. Yes, you chose your guilt over our truth. He nodded, unable to speak. I sat back down, not because I wanted to be near him, but because my legs wouldn't hold me anymore. We sat in silence for a long time, the Montana sun streaming through the windows, dust motes floating in the light. Finally, I said, "You know what the worst part is?" He looked at me. Part of me understands. Part of me knows that what you went through, what they did to you, would break anyone. And that part of me wants to forgive you. Hope flickered across his face. But I can't, I continued. Because you didn't just break yourself, James. You broke us. And you did it on purpose. You chose to let us suffer rather than ask us to help you survive. The hope died in his eyes. "You're right," he whispered. "You're absolutely right." I stood up. "Sophie's 15 now. It's her choice whether she wants to meet you. Not mine. Not yours. Hers. Will you tell her?" I looked at this stranger wearing my dead husband's face, and I thought, I don't know who you are anymore. "Yes," I said. "I'll tell her, and then I'll let her decide what happens next." I walked toward the door. His voice stopped me. "Ellie?" I turned. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know that's not enough, but I'm sorry." I nodded, because what else was there to say? Loss isn't burying an empty casket. It's standing in a room with someone you once loved and realizing they died anyway, just not in the way anyone told you. I need to stop here and tell you something that's going to make you uncomfortable. James had a reason, a good reason. Trauma, PTSD, torture. And you know what the worst part is? Part of me understood why he did it. That's the thing that keeps me up at night. Because if I can see the logic in that level of betrayal, what does that say about what I'm capable of? What does that say about what you're capable of? You need to understand how good people make terrible choices, how love turns into betrayal so slowly you don't notice until it's too late. Subscribe now. Because the next story could be about someone you know, or worse, it could be about you. I drove home without giving him an answer. Didn't forgive him, didn't curse him, didn't promise anything or threaten anything. I just stood up, walked out of that common room, and left him sitting there with his scars and his shame. The drive back was different from the drive there. No rage, no hope, just a vast echoing emptiness that felt like driving through a tunnel with no end. I stopped at the same gas station in Nebraska, bought coffee I didn't drink, stared at my phone and thought about calling my sister, but what would I say? You were right. I should have turned around. But now it's too late, and I don't know how to unknow what I know. I got home at 3 a.m. Sophie was asleep upstairs. My sister was on the couch, wine glass on the coffee table, waiting. "Well?" she asked. "I can't talk about it yet," I said. She studied my face, then nodded. "Okay, but Ellie, whatever it is, don't carry it alone." But that's exactly what I did. For 2 weeks, I carried it alone. I went to work, taught my classes, graded papers on perspective and shading, smiled at parent-teacher conferences, and told concerned parents their kids were doing fine, just fine. I made dinner every night, asked Sophie about her day, helped her study for her chemistry exam, and inside, I was unraveling. Because now I had to make the same choice James had made 15 years ago: tell the truth and shatter my daughter's world, or keep the lie and protect her from it. And I understood, for the first time, why he'd chosen silence. Because the truth was a grenade, and once you pulled the pin, there was no putting it back. I'd look at Sophie across the dinner table, talking about her friends, about the boy in chemistry class, about trying out for the spring musical, and I'd think, in 5 minutes, I could destroy all of this. I could tell her that everything she knows about her father is wrong, that he's alive, that he chose to stay away, that the hero I built for her was just a story I told to make the absence hurt less. Every morning I'd wake up and think, today, I'll tell her today. And every night I'd go to bed, having kept the secret one more day. I was becoming him. The realization hit me one night while I was brushing my teeth, staring at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. I was doing exactly what James had done, convincing myself that silence was protection, that I was sparing her, that just a little more time wouldn't hurt, but it was cowardice dressed up as love. I told her on a Sunday morning. I woke up early and made her favorite breakfast, buttermilk pancakes with too much syrup, the way she'd liked them since she was 6. I set the table carefully, put out the real maple syrup, not the fake stuff, poured orange juice into the good glasses we usually save for holidays. When Sophie came downstairs, still in her pajamas, hair messy from sleep, she looked at the table and smiled. "What's the occasion?" "Nothing," I said. "Just felt like making pancakes." We ate in comfortable silence for a while. She told me about a TikTok she'd seen. I laughed in the right places. Normal. One last normal moment before everything changed. Then I set down my fork and said, "Sophie, I need to tell you something about your father." The shift in her was immediate. She went very still, the way deer do when they sense danger. "Okay," she said carefully. "He's alive." I watched her process the words, watched her face cycle through confusion, disbelief, and then something that looked like understanding but couldn't be, because how could she understand when I barely did? "What?" Her voice was quiet. "Your father is alive. He's been alive. He's in Montana. He called me 2 weeks ago." I waited for tears, for screaming, for her to throw something or collapse or react in any of the ways I'd imagined during my sleepless nights. Instead, she just stared at me. Then she asked, in a voice so cold it didn't sound like hers, "How long have you known?" 2 weeks. She pushed her chair back from the table, stood up, looked at me like I was a stranger. 2 weeks, she repeated. "Sophie, you've known for 2 weeks that my father, the father you told me was dead, the father I've mourned my entire life, is alive? And you didn't tell me?" I needed time to process. "You needed time?" Her voice was rising now. "What about me? What about my time? My right to know that my father didn't die, that he's been alive this whole time and chose not to be in my life? That's not... It's complicated." "Did he ask about me?" she interrupted. "When he called, did he ask about me?" I hesitated. "Yes." "And you still waited 2 weeks to tell me?" She walked out. Not dramatically. No slammed doors or shouted words. She just walked upstairs, packed a bag, called my sister, and left. I heard her on the phone in her room. "Can you come get me? I need to stay with you for a while." I stood at the bottom of the stairs, listening to her move around her room, and I didn't try to stop her. Because what could I say? She was right. I'd done exactly what James had done. I'd taken her choice away. My sister picked her up 30 minutes later. Sophie walked past me with her overnight bag, wouldn't look at me. "I'll call you," my sister said quietly. The door closed. Sophie stayed gone for 3 days. 3 days of an empty house and unanswered texts. 3 days of sitting in her bedroom doorway, looking at her unmade bed and her chemistry textbooks still open on her desk. 3 days of understanding what I'd broken. When she finally came home, it was late afternoon. She let herself in with her key, found me in the kitchen, pretending to read a book I hadn't turned a page of in an hour. "I want to meet him," she said. "No hello. No explanation of where she'd been or what she'd thought about, just that. "Okay," I said. "I need to know why. Why he stayed away. Why he let me think he was dead." "I understand." "Do you?" She looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something in her eyes that destroyed me. Disappointment. "Because you did the same thing. You had information that belonged to me and you kept it because it was easier than telling me the truth." And there it was, the truth I'd been avoiding. "You're right," I said. "I did, and I'm sorry. I thought I was protecting you, but I was just being a coward," she finished. "Like him." The word hung between us. Coward. She wasn't wrong. "I'll arrange the trip," I said quietly. "Whenever you're ready." She nodded and went upstairs. I sat in the kitchen as the sun set, thinking about how easy it is to become the thing you hate. How James had chosen silence 15 years ago, and I'd chosen it 2 weeks ago, and the distance between us wasn't as vast as I'd wanted to believe. We were both cowards. The only difference was Sophie could see through both of us now, and that destroyed me more than anything, because I realized she had the right to make her own choice about her father. She had the right to know him, to judge him, to forgive him or not. And I'd almost taken that from her, just like he did. I'd almost stolen her truth to avoid my pain. Sophie met her father 6 months ago. I drove her to Montana, stayed in a hotel 15 miles from the facility, and waited in the parking lot while she went inside. She was in there for 3 hours. When she came out, her eyes were red, but she wasn't crying. She got in the car, buckled her seatbelt, and said, "Can we just drive for a while?" So we drove. Through Montana, into Wyoming, all the way to the South Dakota border before she finally spoke. "He's not who I thought he'd be," she said. "No," I agreed. "He's not who any of us thought he'd be." They talk on the phone now. Not often. Maybe once a month. Sometimes less. I hear her in her room sometimes, voice low, and I know it's him. I don't ask what they say. That's between them. She's 18 now, graduated high school last spring, preparing for college in the fall. Old enough to decide what forgiveness looks like for her. I haven't forgiven James. I don't know if I ever will. People expect me to, I think. They expect some grand reconciliation, some Hollywood ending where love conquers trauma and we all heal together. But life doesn't work that way. Some broken things stay broken, no matter how carefully you try to piece them back together. But I understand him now in a way I wish I didn't, because I kept his secret for 2 weeks, and in that small window of silence, I felt something I never expected. Relief. Suffocating, shameful relief. Relief that I didn't have to explain. Didn't have to watch Sophie's world collapse. Didn't have to face the questions I couldn't answer. And I realized that's what he must have felt for 15 years. That same relief. The relief of not having to face the truth. Of protecting yourself from someone else's pain by pretending you're protecting them. It's a seductive lie. The kind that wraps around you like a blanket until you can't remember what the cold felt like. People ask me if I'm glad he's alive. I tell them yes, because that's what they want to hear. Because anything else sounds monstrous. Of course I'm glad my husband survived. Of course I'm grateful he didn't die. That's the script I'm supposed to follow. But the honest answer is, I don't know. I'm glad for Sophie. I'm glad she has the chance to know him, to build whatever relationship they can salvage from the wreckage. I'm glad he got help. I'm glad he's not suffering alone in whatever dark place he was suffering before. But the man I married died in that desert 15 years ago. The man who called me was a stranger who wore his voice, who had his eyes and his careful way of choosing words, but none of the trust, none of the partnership, none of the sacred promise that we'd face hard things together. James made a choice when he was broken and terrified and traumatized beyond anything I can imagine. He chose to protect himself, and in doing so, he killed the marriage we had. Not the man, the marriage. And you can't resurrect what's already been buried. Sometimes, I lie awake at night and try to pinpoint the exact moment we became strangers. Was it the day the IED went off? The day he woke up in that cell? The day the military gave him the choice and he chose silence? Or was it earlier, Some hairline fracture in our foundation that we never noticed until the whole structure came down? I don't know. What I do know is this: love isn't always enough to survive the truth. I loved James at 25. I loved him at 28 when they told me he was dead. I loved the memory of him for 15 years. But love isn't a shield against betrayal. It's not a bandage you can slap over a wound this deep and expect it to heal. And sometimes the cruelest lie is the one we tell ourselves, that we're protecting the people we love, when really we're just protecting ourselves from their pain. James told himself he was sparing us, sparing Sophie from a broken father, sparing me from the burden of his trauma. But what he was really doing was sparing himself from having to be vulnerable, from having to trust us with his brokenness, from having to believe we loved him enough to stay. And I told myself I was sparing Sophie, giving myself time to process, to find the right words, to cushion the blow. But what I was really doing was sparing myself from her reaction, from her anger, from having to admit that I'd kept a secret that wasn't mine to keep. We were both cowards, just at different scales. Sophie knows this now. She doesn't say it outright, but I see it in the way she looks at both of us, with a clear-eyed understanding that's far too mature for 18. She forgives neither of us completely, trusts neither of us entirely, but she's building her own relationship with the truth, separate from what we gave her. And maybe that's the only good thing to come from this. She learned early that love and honesty aren't the same thing, that people can love you and still lie to you, that protection and control often wear the same face. I still wear the dog tags sometimes, not often, maybe a few times a year, on days when the past feels particularly heavy. I'll pull them out of the drawer where I keep them now, not around my neck anymore, not tucked under my shirt like a secret. But when I wear them, it's not for James. It's for the woman I was at 28, the one who opened the door to notification officers while holding her baby on her hip, the one who believed love could survive anything, the one who wore those tags like a lifeline, like if she held on tight enough, she could keep him alive through sheer force of will. She deserved better than what we both became. She deserved a husband who trusted her with his pain. She deserved a future where hard truths were faced together, not hidden away like shameful secrets. She deserved a marriage that could bend without breaking. But that woman doesn't exist anymore. She died the same day James did, or didn't. It's hard to know which anymore. What's left is me, Eleanor. Hartwell, 48 years old, art teacher, mother of a daughter who's learning to navigate a world without clear villains or heroes. I'm not the widow I thought I was. I'm not the wife I used to be. I'm just someone who learned, too late, that the people we love are capable of breaking us in ways we never imagine. And sometimes we're capable of breaking them right back. I thought I knew what loss felt like. I was wrong. Loss is understanding that some endings don't come with closure. They just come with scars, and you learn to carry them. So here's my question for you. What are you carrying right now that you think is protecting someone, but is really just protecting you from the truth? Because that's what this story is really about. Not James, not his betrayal, but the moment I realized I'd become him. 2 weeks. That's all it took for me to understand why he stayed silent for 15 years. 2 weeks of relief, 2 weeks of cowardice disguised as love. You're watching this and thinking, I would never do that. That's what I thought too. That's what James thought. We were both wrong. If you're not subscribed, subscribe now, because these aren't just stories. They're warnings. They're mirrors. And one day, you're going to see yourself in one of them, and you're going to be grateful you paid attention. Thank you for listening to mine. Now go check on the people you love before it's too late.